So welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me. I have Mr. Fitzroy Frew. He's a principal in a middle school in Loudoun County, Virginia. Principal Frew, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you, Derek, Mr. Andrews? How are you this morning?
I'm doing well, man. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I want this conversation to eventually evolve into sort of like a resource, some best practices, some best tips, some, you know, inside trade secrets that you could pass on to parents to help them, better navigate the American education system and to better prepare, right? Because you are a principal of a middle school, and I feel like you're right in the sweet spot. As kids come out of elementary school into middle school, you're preparing them to go into high school and then to go into the future. So I want you to start us off and tell us about your education experience, right? From a child in Jamaica and then transition into when you came to America.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I was born in 74 in Jamaica. And so that's 12 years after Jamaica gained its independence from Britain. So it's still a very British infused system in Jamaica, the way that schooling is. Went to basic school. Basic school is probably what we call here in America pre-K and elementary, like a one room little school with multiple ages in that room. I grew up at one point in the very rural part of Jamaica with my grandparents, who, and this is important, sugarcane farmers.
Mm.
So every little thing they have to pay for school fee came from, a lot of sweat, a lot of hard work, and so on and so forth. And then around the age of 8 or so, I went to live with my father in Portmore in St. Catherine, which is where I was born. And Portmore is considered a suburb of Kingston. Everyone knows Kingston, Jamaica. And so from 8 to 10, I was in what's called an all age school, which again is akin to elementary. One of the great thing about Jamaican school system is you have to, when you get to 5th grade, 6th grade, thereabouts, you have to take an exam. At the time, what's called the common entrance exam. And the way it works is if I'm a student that was at Gregory Park All Age School, you designate or pick your two top choices if you're successful where you want to go, right? And so I chose, I don't remember the second choice, it was not important, but I chose Jamaica College. And even though it says college, it's basically grade 6 through 12, 13.
Hmm.
So it's called Jamaica College. It's really a secondary school. A lot of former prime ministers and important, not important, but famous folks went through Jamaica College. It's one of the premier school in Jamaica. So you take
Hmm.
your common entrance. You say, I want to go to Jamaica College. One of the great things about Jamaican school is you have to wear uniform. So a lot
Hmm.
of khakis, khakis, we say
Hmm.
khakis, but it's
Yeah.
khakis. And Jamaica College was one of the few schools that didn't wear khakis, right? We wear blue. So
Mm.
our pants were dark blue and our shirt were sky blue or royal blue. So when we gather like at a bus stop, because in Jamaica you take public transportation, those JC boys, right? It
Mm.
stands out.
Yeah.
Once you get in, if you're successful, which I was, first of all, education in Jamaica, it's a really, really big thing. You can go a lot of places in Jamaica based on education. So when you take common entrance, all the students who take it from every school throughout Jamaica who pass, your name is in the Jamaican Gleaner, which is a
Hmm.
Jamaican newspaper. So it's a big thing. It's a
Absolutely.
source of pride.
Hmm.
When you get to quote unquote high school, so when I got to JC, it was first form, second form, third form, which was basically akin to sixth, seventh, eighth grade, thereabouts. And so you're getting a very formal education, foundational. When you get to fourth form, that's when you kind of declare what you want to be. You start being on a track. It can be
Hmm.
like fourth arts or fourth government, fourth science, so on and so forth. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer from a young age. My father was a police officer and a lot of his buddies who hung out in our front yard playing dominoes and drinking Red Stripe. They were
Yeah.
cops and soldiers
Hmm.
and everything like that. So kind of had some connection there, hearing them
Hmm.
talk about going to court and everything. So I always wanted to be a lawyer.
Right.
Luckily, I left Jamaica right around fourth form. I came to America in '89,
Hmm.
and you and I had a conversation. Majority of Jamaicans either go to New York City or Florida.
Hmm.
And my mother, who had come, she came here as a resident, got her green card, then her citizenship
Hmm.
filed for me, so I can come.
Hmm.
So I came to America, and I
Hmm.
came in '89. Lived in Manhattan for a little while. That's a dark secret because I tell everyone I'm from the Bronx, uh,
Mm.
but lived in Manhattan for a little while and went to a school in Lower Manhattan, Park West High School.
Mm.
And when during the immigration process in Jamaica, having to go to the U.S. Embassy for days on end and stand in line, I didn't finish fourth form. So when I came to America in '89, I should have started 10th grade. They put me back in ninth grade, like, oh, based on
Mm.
your Jamaican record, you didn't
Right.
finish, so you have to go back to ninth grade. So my ninth grade and part of my 10th grade was a mixture of high scores,
Hmm.
grades, but also boredom, because
Yeah.
most of it I had done
Right. Right.
before in Jamaica. What kept me
Hmm.
on the straight and narrow was I had a mom who was singular in her focus, right? Was you're not going to come to this country and act like you don't have any sense. You're not going to
Right.
come to this country and waste the opportunities. And I hear all the time, there's so, how many people in Jamaica would kill to be this, and coming to America and getting that free education is almost like winning the lottery, right?
Absolutely.
For some, it changed the entire trajectory of your life.
Hmm.
The one of the first thing that I noticed in maybe my first month or so in American school, one, you pay for everything in Jamaica. So
Hmm.
bus fare, you get on public transportation, you're wearing your uniform might be cheaper. So maybe an adult is paying $5 for a trip. You as a student maybe only paying two. I don't remember the cost of it, but there's a cost.
Hmm.
There's no textbook that's just assigned to you at the start of the year and just return it in good shape at the end of the year. You have to buy everything. There's a couple stores downtown Kingston where you get your book list and you go and you buy,
Hmm. Right.
hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And then there's no free and reduced lunch. You have to buy lunch, online, like good things. So when I came to America, I remember my first week, I was going from class to class, and they were assigning me book English class, and it may have been a $30 for this. You see the price in it, $30 for this. My math book was that. I remember getting to science. I think it was a biology class, and it was like $45. And I'm doing the math in my head because my
Hmm.
mother worked as a nurse's aide. They now call it like home health aide. Now she goes in
Hmm.
and work with older patients, taking care of them in their home.
Hmm.
And I remember, I'm adding up, I'm tallying up $30 plus 35, that's 65 plus. And I remember getting to science, and my science class was the most expensive. I think it was like $45, and this is 1989. I
Hmm.
remember raising my hand to the teacher and said, when is the money due? And
Yeah.
all the other kids snickering fresh off the boat, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah. Yeah.
money. You just, you put you put your name in it, you cover it up,
Yeah.
and then you return it. So that
Hmm.
was my first experience in what it really means to come to America and be
Hmm.
entitled to a free and appropriate education,
Yeah.
right? In my home, my mother, as I shared with you, my mother had me young. She was 18 when she had me. Um, you know, and I shared with you earlier, like, hey, don't come to America and act like a fool or do this.
Hmm.
And so in my house, nothing less than a B was
Hmm.
appropriate,
Yeah.
was acceptable.
Hmm.
Nothing less than a B. And my mother was, a very small woman in stature, but very, feisty, them Jamaican, I always say mama and them, grandmama and them. She was the definition of
Hmm.
that, like, and when she's serious, because she put a Mister in front of your name. When
Hmm.
your older folks put a Mister in front of your name, when they
Yeah.
formalize it, in trouble.
Yeah.
You're in trouble. So when it's like Mr. Fitzroy, listen,
Yeah. Yeah.
that that's that's over and done there. And so my mother was, if I'm sitting at the stoop, we lived, we moved in 1990, early 1990 to the Bronx, and where I spent
Mm.
most of my childhood and so on and so forth. And if I'm sitting at the stoop, she'd stick her head out the window, fourth floor, and the whole block would hear, Fitzroy, if you don't get to your, well, and you can feel it
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
upstairs. And, and my mother, she passed away in 1996. She probably couldn't have done the first or problem in an Algebra 1 class, not because she was not smart, she was incredibly smart, but she was not schooled, she was not
Hmm.
formally educated.
Right. Right.
But she knew that education was going to be that vehicle that gets me wherever I wanted to go. And
Hmm.
she knew that you could be educated and that, in a sense, can't be taken away from you. You could be a
Hmm.
gifted athlete and blow out your knee. You could
Right.
even be a gifted singer and your voice box or something happened. But
Hmm.
once you get that education, that knowledge, she truly believed that knowledge was power and
Right.
knowledge was the key to all success that awaited me.
Hmm.
So she was very, very just singular. And, and as a young man, 15, 16, 17, I have a bunch of friends I hung out with, mostly Jamaican or people from the Caribbean, some Trinity, some, guys from
Yeah.
Trinity and Guyana and
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
and we had similar parenting, but
Hmm.
the guys that I hung out with, my mother was very like, you're not going to go to that party until you sit
Hmm.
out and get. So my buddies would pull up and beep beep, yo, Frew, we're hitting that basement party in
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Webster Ave, or we
Yeah.
going to East Tremont or whatever. And she's
Yeah.
like, if you move your butt from that, see what happened. And
Yeah.
the threats are usually worse when they're not specified. See what happened.
Right.
I never
Right.
wanted to
Right.
see what happened.
Right.
And so I love and respected, but there was also a healthy fear of that woman, which
Hmm.
has come to serve me well in life. I remember once my buddy and I had my best friend growing up in high school, Marlon. And Marlon and I, by the time I left my house and go to Marlon's house and we went to Park West together, so, we're late. And in
Yeah.
New York City at the time, if you're late for first block, they lock the doors and you have to wait outside. So
Hmm.
come rain, sun, or shine, snow,
Yeah.
whatever, you're waiting outside.
Hmm.
I remember, I believe I may have been in a geometry class. I spent my first 2 years at Park West. So geometry or maybe pre-calc or something along that line.
Hmm.
And I came home with a C plus. Remember, the
Mm.
rule is nothing less
Yeah.
than a B.
Hmm.
I don't remember what she was cooking up, boy, but she was cooking, and I came in and I'm telling her my grades because now in most educational system you can access your kid's grade via some kind of platform.
Right.
My
Right.
wife and I utilize Parent View here in Loudon
Hmm.
to we can check our daughters. We have
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
a 10th grader and a fifth grader. We can check their grades remotely. You have to bring home
Yeah.
your report card. So I'm listing the report card, and I, purposefully left out my first block because that
Yeah.
was the math class I kept missing. And in New
Hmm.
York City at the time, it wasn't block scheduling. It was basically 1 through 7, 1 through 8 every day. So I was
Hmm.
missing first block a lot.
Hmm.
And my teacher was a really good math teacher, very strong, but she taught almost at college, like, if you miss three or more of my class, I'm going to
Yeah.
dock you,
Yeah.
because, attendance is key. And so I saw with second block and I'm telling her, oh, B plus this and A minus that and A this and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, what happened to your math score? Because I
Mm.
thought fooled her and
Yeah.
everything like
Yeah.
that. What's for dinner? And she's like, what
Yeah.
happened to, and I said, oh, it's a C plus.
Yeah.
And, and she says, is a C plus a B? Of course
Yeah.
it's not, but it's a
Yeah.
trick question, Derek, and I
Yeah.
wanted
Yeah.
to. So I'm like, no. So what happened? I'm like, oh, see, because sometime by the time we get to the subway, it's whatever. And if the C train is not on time, we have to wait for the D train, and she's like, boy, listen to me. And I swear to you, whatever she's cutting up, she had that knife in her hand. Now, I don't think
Mm.
she would have done me harm, but I wouldn't put it past her. She's
Yeah.
like, bring another C plus in this house and see what happens.
Hmm.
That was the end of that.
Yeah.
Right. And so navigating through the school system, I'm the first in my family to have gone through formalized American high school
Hmm.
education, public
Yep.
school.
Yep.
There are things my mother did not know that now, looking back, she probably could have advocated for,
Hmm.
right? I did well in high school, did somewhat well in college,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a principal now, so obviously life in a lot of ways have worked out for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no conversation in my house about, are you taking an advanced math class in ninth
Mm-hmm.
grade or 10th grade, right?
Right.
What is the difference in New York City, New York State between the regions and the RCT?
Mm-hmm.
What is the PSAT? What is
Mm-hmm.
the ACT versus the
Mm-hmm.
SAT?
Mm-hmm.
What is an average score to get in colleges,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So those conversations weren't happening in my house.
Yeah.
When I got to Truman, I left Park West after my 10th grade year, and I went to Truman in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, three fantastic people in my life. One was
Mm-hmm.
my AP Lang, 11th grade English teacher, and she also
Mm-hmm.
was my AP Lit, 12th grade. And Judy Crutoy, I don't know if she's still alive. I look her up every once in a while. I know last thing I saw was she retired years ago. But Mrs. Crutoy and then Mr. Baldessere, my 12th grade AP government teacher, and then
Mm-hmm.
my high school football Coach Glaba, right? And this is not an inappropriate time to say all three are white
Mm-hmm.
folks, right? But
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
saw in me, and people like me, meaning other students with talent, with some level of academic success, and they
Mm-hmm.
pushed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They didn't want us to become a statistic, right?
Right. Right.
Mrs. Scrutoy was, because she was AP Lang and AP Lit, so
Mm-hmm.
most of us from the Caribbean, we are trilingual, right? We speak
Mm-hmm.
Patois or some native dialect. We
Mm-hmm.
speak the Queen's English, the proper English, but we
Yeah.
also speak Hood, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We do speak Hood when we're with our friends, and what up, and that's
Yeah.
dope, and that's
Yeah.
and but you walk into a class, and that ends at the water's edge,
Mm-hmm.
because when you walk into Mrs. Scrutoy's class, you're going to speak well, you're going to write well, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
capitalize, just simple things that other teachers would, let's say, let go, or I'm happy you complete the assignment. No, Mrs.
Mm-hmm.
Scrutoy is like, I'm happy you complete the assignment, but we capitalize the word English in this class, Mr. Frew. We
Mm-hmm.
indent every paragraph, Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Frew.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and that training, that sense of being held accountable was
Mm-hmm.
not uncommon to how my mom held me accountable at home,
Right.
right?
Right.
Which is a great, you and I will eventually get to my role now as a principal, which is a
Yeah.
great um, thing that has stayed in me, that you
Mm-hmm.
need that partnership between home and school. You need
Mm-hmm.
that consistency between home and school. So,
Yes.
I remember taking a PSAT in my 10th grade, 11th grade year, maybe early 11th grade. I took PSAT,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought I was naturally smart. I could do well without much studying, and I bombed the PSAT, in full
Mm-hmm.
disclosure.
Yeah.
I don't think I got 1,000.
Yeah.
And I think it was the first time in my life I questioned. I thought I was one of the smartest people in any room I walked into. I don't think that now, but as a young man, you're full of yourself and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And I thought I was incredibly smart. I read a lot and always had a curious mind and all those things. And I couldn't even get 1,000 in a
Mm-hmm.
PSAT. And it really hit me for, a minute or two. And then, and even though I was at Truman, Park West had a program where I think maybe 8 to 10, maybe 12 weeks, and every Saturday you'd go
Mm.
in, and they had like a SAT prep course for free, right?
Yeah.
Because we were free and reduced or economically disadvantaged. My mom
Mm-hmm.
didn't make much, right? So I went, and that's the first time you really learn how to slash the trash, right? You read the question, underline keywords, highlight keywords. What is it
Mm-hmm.
asking you? So if it's asking you to define, if it's asking you about conclude, then you
Mm-hmm.
can say, well, this is not about conclude. That's not. So you slash the trash. Now
Yeah.
you're down to maybe two or three choices. Reread the sentence. So it's
Mm-hmm.
the first time I really was taught how to take a standardized test.
This is test taking strategy that you're learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of kids throughout my career. Yes, I'm a middle school principal now, but prior to this, I spent 7 years as a high school assistant principal.
Mm-hmm.
and before that, 5 years as a middle school dean, right? So my
Mm-hmm.
admin journey has varied. And there are a lot of kids that I've worked with who are incredibly smart, who don't
Mm-hmm.
do well in standardized testing,
Yep. Yep.
right? They get nervous. It's like,
Yeah.
it's a high wire act for some of them.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I did well, got a decent SAT score,
Mm-hmm.
and got into a really good college in Western New York.
Mm.
I wanted to be in a city area, but I knew that if I'd stayed in the Bronx, if I'd stayed in New York City, I would not have, I would party too much. My buddies were still there. I would still be this,
Yeah.
that, and the other. So I went to, it's at the time it was Duville College, D apostrophe Youville was Duville College at the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
Duville University now. My
Mm-hmm.
wife, actually, who I met there, recently sent me an article that Duville is considered the best school in Western New York in terms of value, the education
Mm-hmm.
that you get for the price of
Absolutely. Yeah. Bang for your
uh,
buck.
right. And I think it's not. I think it was started in 1908. It was named for Saint Margaret Duville. It was the
Mm.
first school in Western New York for women,
Mm.
right? In 1908, right around the suffragette movement and so on and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and it has a lot of science programs. So my wife, who has a degree in PT, so it's PT, OT, PA, biology, and
Mm-hmm.
education.
Mm-hmm.
They do
Mm-hmm.
education well, right? A lot of
Right.
folks. It's right by basically the Peace Bridge, one of the last exit before you leave this country and you're in Canada.
Right.
And boy, talk about another education. Buffalo cold is different, in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, than every
Absolutely.
other. You go there. I went there in August of '93. You have that New York City bop. You have that
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
jacket and your Timberlands and your
Yeah.
cross colors are this, that, and the other. That
No.
first
No match. No
right,
match.
yeah, that you're walking with that New York City bop. That first winter, that first even fall, and that air, that breeze hits you from Lake Erie or that
Yeah,
first
man.
lake, man, all of that coolness go. You're bundled up, you're walking, eyes
Yeah.
watering for no
Yeah,
reason at
man.
all.
Yeah.
But
And you're
I
getting
got
you're getting the lakefront effect really from two lakes, right? You got
right,
Ontario and you got Erie.
yes, sir. But the education there, looking back, was just world class
Yeah.
and first rate. Our president at the time, the college president, was a nun. A number of our professors were nuns and bishop and priest. It was a Catholic run institution, but you did not have to be Catholic. So it's almost like
Mm.
going to Catholic school for,
Yeah.
middle and whatever. That sense of training, that sense
Mm-hmm.
of, focus on the outcome of education was really key.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while I look back or I speak to folks who have, gone to Duville and everything like that. And, we compare what we hear other people have gone to similar programs from other schools. And it's like Duville was doing some really good things,
Yeah, man.
and
Groundbreaking.
yeah, we actually had a magnet school on campus,
Mm.
right? A magnet high school.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when
yeah.
you were going through your educational program, you could do observation on campus. It was
Mm-hmm.
right
Mm-hmm.
there,
Yeah.
right? So fast forward, got out of college with a lot of debt because poor
Mm-hmm.
boy from the Bronx,
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
I didn't I think fully understand even the what is it FAFSA, the
Mm-hmm.
federal student
Mm-hmm.
loan application. So got
Yep.
out of college with a lot of debt, changed my major twice. This is something that you had asked earlier about
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the nuggets that parents can get from this. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a big believer in gap years.
Mm.
In my master's program, which I took and I'm going to come back to you, but in my master's program that I did after college, I didn't get a straight master's. I came out work and then got my master's years later at George Mason University here in
Mm-hmm.
Northern Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in one of the classes, I proposed because you had to write different proposal. What would your school system look like? What would you change differently about the educational system? My proposal is that every student after high school spends a year, if not 2 years, doing
hmm
something. So go work
hmm
for Habitat for Humanity.
hmm
Go work for the Peace Corps. Go work
hmm
for the military.
hmm
Go do something to get some life skills. Because I
hmm
can tell you, I don't know what the percentage is, but I know it's more than 25% of kids who, when they leave college,
hmm
they leave with a different degree than where they entered it, right?
hmm
So I went to Juville thinking I was going to be a lawyer. It did have a
hmm
decent, program. So English writing and history my first year, and then in the first year, I worked at a clinic in Queens just as a summer job, and I ran into this PA, physician assistant, and I
hmm
asked him, how much do you make? And he said, oh, $80,000. And
Yeah.
for a poor kid from the Bronx, that's money.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of my, Biggie was bigger, and so I'm thinking of my Lexus LX, 4.5, this, that, and the other, you know. So I went back my second year, my sophomore year in college. I'm like, I want to be a PA. And so I start, and dude, I'm telling you, organic chemistry is no joke. Kick my behind. To this day, the Krebs cycle give me PTSD. But anyway, eventually found my way to education. The reason I took this detour and spoke a little about the proposal that I wrote in for my master's is the nugget that I would tell parents. It's not a bad thing if your kid takes a gap year or two. It's not a
hmm
bad thing even if they go to a local community college, take some
Right.
classes
hmm
that would transfer. Like, for example, here now in Virginia, you can go to Nova for a year or two.
hmm
It's much cheaper. And
Yeah.
based on your, what you do in terms of grade wise, you get
hmm
automatic acceptance to a number of Virginia schools, including UVA,
Absolutely.
including, Tech and,
hmm
all these places. So
Yep.
that's a nugget I would say to parents. If your child is unsure, or you feel as if they could use a little more seasoning before they fly the coop, it's
hmm
not a bad thing for them to maybe work and do some things
Yeah.
because I think I went to college unprepared. I went to
Yes.
college because I wanted to get out of the Bronx.
hmm
I went to college because I would have been the first in my family, and I was the first in my family to do so, but I
Yeah.
was unsure. That
Yeah.
racked up more debt. That was an
Yes.
extra 2 years in
Yeah.
debt.
And let me pause you for a second because you're hitting on something that's crucial, right? Like you touched on a percentage. You said maybe 25% of people who graduate from college are graduating with a different major than the major they initially started off with, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're being very fair when you say that. So I think I use this example a lot. Enterprise rental car. Enterprise rental car has figured out something that your education system hasn't really figured out. And what Enterprise Rental Car has figured out, because Enterprise Rental Car is one of the top hirers of recent college graduates, right? They're one of the companies that hires the most recent college graduates. And if we went and we surveyed all those people who graduate from college and go to work at Enterprise Rental Car in their managerial training program, I could venture to say that probably upwards of 85 to 90% of them, when they entered college, didn't say, upon graduating from college, I'm going to go work at the airport at Enterprise Rental Car. Now, there's nothing wrong with going there, but I'm saying that all to say, and to piggyback on the point you're making about going to college and being underprepared. Like you knew coming out of high school that college was made the most sense, right? It was the next step, especially coming out of JC back in Jamaica. That's JC's kind of putting you already on a college trajectory, right? So you kind of know that I'm gonna be expected to go to college. Like whether someone is saying that to you or not, that's already embedded in you, right? So you know upon finishing high school, college is the next gradual step. But also what I appreciate about what you said, your admission about not being prepared, and I think that's crucial, right? Because it's the alignment. So when you talk about doing a gap year or two, it's really about the exposure. It's about exposing kids to different careers, different opportunities, but it's also building up their humanity, right? So if they work for Habitat for Humanity, they work for Peace Corps, they get to hopefully explore another part of the country. They get to see a different way of life, which then helps to ground them, right? I think you had that grounding in a sense, coming from Jamaica. coming to America, you get to, you got to see what life was like in two different worlds. In Jamaica, everything costs, right? You got to pay for the textbook, you got to pay for your meals, you got to pay the van when you're going home. You come to America, I know like living in New York, I lived in New York when I first came here. We used to get bus passes when I went to
Yep.
school, right? They would
Yes.
provide a bus pass and you use the bus pass to travel. The books were free, right? You didn't have to pay, school fees. Like if you're going to public school, it's pretty much free. But I agree with you about being prepared. And it's not your fault. It's not your mom's fault. It's just you didn't really know, right? And if you're gonna go to college thinking that, hey, I want to become a lawyer, if you knew and you kind of knew early that you wanted to explore being a lawyer, even back in Jamaica, you kind of were dabbling with that early. But then that kind of interest needs to be nurtured, while you're in high school, right? So then that conversation with your mom and then with your teachers, so then they can hopefully bring in a lawyer for you to talk to, do an information interview. What is a day like in a day of the life of a lawyer? So that you have a good understanding, then you can start to choose your classes in high school that help to prepare you. Versus when you go in and you switch your major to become a PA because you're chasing the money, then the reason organic chemistry, and I can relate to this, the reason organic chemistry knocked your socks off is because in high school you weren't prepared. You weren't on an
Yeah.
organic chemistry track in high school. So it's not that you couldn't do the work, it's that you were woefully underprepared. Because had you known that you were going to be a PA, you would have taken the classes that you would have taken in high school would have been different to prepare you for that major, right? And if those classes were not offered at your high school, you could have gone to the community college, in the summertime, or you could have gotten out of school and done dual enrollment in high school to then properly prepare you to go to college and to be successful in that major as a PA. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
this is canary in the coal mine stuff. This is you just bumping your head against doors trying to figure it out, which is similar to my experience, right? Just trying to figure out where is my sweet spot? What is my thing?
Yeah, and I think one of the things you also hit on, just to touch on what you just did, is I think within what you're saying is we have to start almost looking at a paradigm shift in how we educate kids moving forward.
Absolutely.
I am not I'm a big believer in public education, really am. I, however, can see, and we're now in this weird space in American culture and society, and it's not a political conversation,
Tell
but
me
you look
more.
at one of the, I think, main thing that former President Biden did, was college forgiveness, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
do think there's a space for President Trump to address that,
Mm-hmm.
right, for a whole host of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I can see in the next maybe, Derek, 10 to 25 years, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's generous, where a lot of companies, you mentioned enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
well, they're going to say, if I can start going into high school and identify potential
Mm-hmm.
workers, I can send them after high school maybe to this 18-month program. I can send them to this 24 months program
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then train them specifically for what enterprise need. Because there are also corporations and companies, kids who come out of the very best schools in this country, Harvard,
Mm-hmm.
Yale,
Mm-hmm.
UVA here, Mason,
Mm-hmm.
when they get to some of these IT companies in Northern Virginia, data centers are popping up like 100 every day, it seems, right? You still have to train them, almost onboard them.
Right.
Imagine if we can, and that student is incurring costs for those 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, like me, if you switch
Mm-hmm.
major several
Mm-hmm.
times. Imagine
Mm-hmm.
if, there's some kind of program where you do some kind of internship and
Mm-hmm.
enterprise identify you. And so now they
Yeah.
say, upon graduation of high school, if you
Yeah.
graduate with a 3.0, if you graduate with a 3.5, we're going to put you through a paid internship program and
Mm-hmm.
put you in our managerial
Yeah.
track.
Training program. Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to incur,
Yeah.
anywhere from 100 to $200,000 in
Right.
student loan. My
Yeah.
my oldest daughter, who is in 10th grade, went down to friends of hers, to William and Mary a couple months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and she came and I said, "Did they talk about price and cost?" And she's like, "Yeah, around 50."
Mm-hmm.
So for my daughter, if
Mm-hmm.
she has her druthers to go to William and Mary, you're talking about approximately $200,000
On the low end.
over 4 years. And that's
Mm-hmm.
if she
Yeah.
doesn't change her major, she doesn't have
Yeah.
to do an extra semester, maybe a semester
Mm-hmm.
abroad, or all the other things that sometimes college costs
Mm-hmm.
incur. So I just think it's something, one, there's going to be a paradigm shift in how we educate kids,
Yeah.
secondary level and the post-secondary level.
This is perfect. So I'm putting a pin in that because what I'm gonna do is I'm dropping the bomb, and I got the bomb from you. So I'm dropping the bomb in this conversation. We're gonna take the gloves off because so we're gonna have our own paradigm shift in this conversation, right?
Yes,
Because you're
sir.
in a position of leadership, and I spoke to you, and you shared this with me, and since you shared this with me, I've taken it and I've ran with it. And
Okay.
I've had conversations with a lot of people about this, right? Because when you said this to me, it completely blew the top off of my, my scalp. So, and what you shared with me was from you know where I'm going with this. It's from the orientation you went to before you became principal and what the keynote speaker said. So I'm teeing it up, right? Because I think you know where I'm going with this, but I'm teeing it up. So you said the keynote speaker came in and said, what will replace? And I'll let you go from there. And I want you to finish what the keynote speaker said, and I want you to tie it into the education system and how we're preparing students and you also as a parent for a future that is kind of blurry. We kind of know what it's going to be, but we're not really sure. So tee it up
Yep.
from, the story where the keynote speaker said, what will replace?
Absolutely. So
Hmm.
this is March of 2023. I am an assistant principal at a high school, and Loudoun County Public School have done a number of different initiatives and ways to encourage teachers, deans, assistant principals to look at the trajectory of your leadership. So it was called Launching Your Leadership or Launching Your Leadership Journey, something along that line. It was held at a middle school, and the keynote speaker was a gentleman who had written a book called "Kids Deserve It." And so we're in the auditorium of the newest or one of the newest middle school. Well, you look at it, it looks like a college auditorium, and he says, "I want everyone to think about this question for a second. What will replace the internet?" And we're all looking around, and people are snickering, and I'm being facetious here, but the Google has always been around. No, it hasn't.
Hmm.
And the internet has always been around. No, it hasn't. In some places, it's depending what you believe. These were government computers that a network was developed so government computers could talk to each other. I believe in the 2000 presidential election, there was some conversation because Vice President Al Gore at the time had made a statement like he developed the internet, and I believe maybe as a senator or vice president that
Hmm.
he had either cast a bill or cast a vote or
Hmm.
proposed a bill or was part of a bill that made these government network more public in the public domain. So but we're all sitting there in the auditorium, and I'm telling you, these are some of the brightest people in Loudoun County, right? People with masters, doctorate, postdoctorate, you name it, there are people there, right? And we're all sitting around like, what will replace the internet? I, the internet will always be around.
Hmm.
And in that moment, what we couldn't see is that the future is yet to be written. We don't know. Just like in the 1970s, if you were to, you and I have this conversation, if you were to say to someone, well, what's going to replace the 8 track? Well, like, man, I'm going to have these 8 track forever. And
Hmm.
then in the 80s, what's going to replace the cassette? I
Hmm.
remember when it got to A side, it just flipped automatically. And,
Hmm.
used to,
That was a big thing.
yeah, you can record songs from the radio,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
things like that. I remember when I got my first Walkman, my Sony Walkman, and
Hmm.
the first one was just a plain black one. The second one was the yellow one, bright yellow one. You could get wet, and then
Hmm.
after that, it was
Waterproof.
CD and every.
Yeah.
Right. So we've gone through it within our own lifestyle, as a
Hmm.
lifetime. And I shared with you, I was born in '74. Look at all the technological advancement that have been made. And so, in that conversation and that question that was asked by that author, by that keynote speaker, what will replace the internet? We were all stuck.
Hmm.
And then he followed up with something which I think where you want us to go is, are we educating our kids the way that we were educated? And the world we currently inhabit today versus the world they're going to inherit. And if we're going to educate them on the world they're going to inherit, we don't know what that inheritance will look like. So what we can do is make sure we're educating them skill based versus
Hmm.
content based. So as the world evolve, they can utilize those skills to match the time that they will find themselves.
Let's unpack this a little bit. And I
Yes,
love
sir.
everything. I love everything that you just said. And I think there's a lot of parallels, right? So I appreciate what the keynote speaker did because the keynote speaker is addressing the leadership, right? Like you're responsible for guiding your students. These are your students, right? You're the captain of this ship, of this. When these students walk into this building, they're your responsibility as the principal, and your let's call it your fiduciary duty is to make sure that all these kids, get the support that they need. And sometimes that requires a certain level of differentiation that may or may not be as consistent as it needs to be, if we're going to be honest, right? And it's not because of the staff or anything like that. It's just because of resources, right? And times in the day and things happen in the day. There's a fire alarm, there's a fire drill, there's this, there's an emergency here. So sometimes, it's only so much that you can get done in a day. Now, you said about the content, right? So they need to be educated more skills based instead of just dumping content on them, right? And then content without context becomes a problem. You just know a lot of stuff, but you don't have the context to apply it properly. And I'm tying this back to when you said you went to college and you were underprepared, right? And I think that's essentially what the keynote speaker is saying. Are we preparing the kids for the world that as we know it versus the world that they're going to encounter, right? And then so you can use, if you have an idea, no one really knows what the future is going to hold, right? But if you have an idea of where things are going, and we can see this in a lot of other areas, right? You can see it. You can go in. I'm sure when you came to Loudoun County, or even when you were working in Fairfax County before, Loudoun County didn't look the way that it looks now, right? But when you first got here, the Loudoun County that we see today is not the Loudoun County that you first encountered, right? So you can see the development, you can see the progression, you can see, sort of like the demographic shifts. So you can see these things coming, right? So we see them coming in a lot of ways. It's the same sort of principles that we want to apply to our children as they're going through the education system, right? So I'm tying it back to your, early interest in becoming a lawyer, right? And then how do we take that early interest that you have and truly explore it? You know what I mean? As parents, to really help to guide you as parents. And like you said, having that accountability and having that collaboration between home and school to really support the child in getting those experiences, exploring the options and the interests that they have, so that if it includes a gap year or not, it then prepares them, you know what I mean, to be competitive and not just be competitive, but to get close to what the goal is going forward.
You're right. Loudon has grown exponentially
Hmm.
in the past couple decades.
When I came to America at 10 years old, right, in 1985, so I went to school for 2 years in New York. Then we moved to Maryland because my mother's oldest brother lived in Maryland, and my mother's oldest brother, all my male cousins, my older male cousins who I grew up with back in St. Vincent, they lived here. So when my mother's job opened up an office in Georgetown in DC, and my mother was like, "You want to move to Maryland?" Before she said you want to move, my bags was packed. I was like, let's get
Yeah.
out of New York, right? So I'm saying that to say, here's the context. I've been living in the DMV since 1987, right? So I remember when Loudoun County didn't look anything like that.
It
You know
was
what I mean?
farmland.
It was farmland, right? So
Yeah.
this is what we're talking about. So it's like you see, and so this is me as a child, like you watching the weather report and you can see Loudoun County, you can see Fairfax County, you can see Prince Williams County, you see all these things, and then you eventually like drive through these places and you're like, oh, that's what it looks like. And it's vastly different than what it looks like now. So I'm using that same lens to say it's the same thing when you're preparing your kid for a future that we're not 100% sure what it's going to be, but we have to be very intentional and deliberate in how we sort of nurture and cultivate their interests so that they are even more prepared. And again, I love your point about the gap year because all those experiences are going to help them to be better prepared to be strong going forward. So I just wanted to throw
Yeah,
that in there.
absolutely. And so as Loudon continues to grow, um, this past fall, Loudon celebrated its 100th school. All right. And for the middle school where I am currently working there, we're the only Title I school.
Mm.
And our demographics requires, I talk to my admin team all the time. We talk, I shouldn't just me talking, but we talk all the time that the staff that we currently have and that we continuously are building is you have to have an all-star team, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is, because the needs are so great. We're a
Mm-hmm.
Title I school. We're approximately 68 to 70% EL population.
Mm-hmm.
We're around similar numbers in terms of uh, financial needs,
Mm-hmm.
free and reduced lunch, economically disadvantaged, whatever you want to call it. Um, we have, for example, we have close to 1,000 students. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at our students with educational needs, what's called an IEP,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those students with IEPs, around 60% of them are also considered dually identified, meaning they
Mm.
have a learning disability while
Mm-hmm.
they're still considered an EL student, they're learning,
Yeah.
right? So we are around 60%. The county's average, the rest of Loudoun County, is around
Mm-hmm.
3%.
Wow.
So we're around 30% more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have families who have been in the Sterling area. I'm in Sterling. Their parents, grandparents, great grandparents of that they're long term Sterling residents.
Mm-hmm.
However, you also have folks who are new to the country, just like I was in '89 when I came from Jamaica. So you have
Absolutely.
from El Salvador, from Guatemala, from
Mm-hmm.
Honduras, from
Mm-hmm.
over Central America,
Yeah.
uh, and other places.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, and sometimes fit does matter in leadership, because coming
Mm-hmm.
here from another country, growing up in the South Bronx in an inner city, growing up, because the South Bronx in the '80s and '90s wasn't an easy place. You
Nope.
gotta you had to navigate certain things, put it that way, and you had to
Yeah.
survive certain things, and it's like survive and advance, right?
That's
So
why I got out of New York in the 80s. I was like,
yeah,
I had to tap out. I got to get out of here.
yeah. It tests you in multiple ways. However, I'll say this as a New Yorker, because I'm a proud New Yorker.
Yeah. You
Some
can
of the
have that.
lessons, yeah, some of the lessons you learn on the street of New York carries you wherever you go. Like,
Absolutely.
sometimes my head is always on a swivel. New York City makes you like ultra just aware of your surrounding.
Absolutely. A hundred
You can
percent.
see 10 people on the street and you can
Yeah.
automatically
Yeah.
identify who may
Yeah.
be a threat, who may not be.
Yeah. And you
And,
have to. You
you have to, right? New York City toughens you in a place because, public transportation, you're standing out there in 18 degrees waiting for the bus, and everything. So there are lessons learned in New York City that I learned in the Bronx
Mhm.
that's going to carry, that has and have carried me through to this point and will carry me through to this point. But back to where I am now, one of the reasons I spoke about New York City, because when I'm speaking to students, right, sometime in my office, because they're 11, 12, 13, 14, they're going to inevitably make mistakes. At 50, I still make mistakes, right?
Mhm.
You can have a conversation with them like, dude, I'm not saying I don't care. I do care about your upbringing. I do care that you're from El Salvador. I do care that you're from Guatemala. I do care that, mom is working 2, 3 jobs to put food on the table. I do care.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, I'm a product of that.
Yeah.
And it's no excuse for you not to try.
Yeah.
It's no excuse for you not to come to school every day.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse for you to act anything other than. And
Yeah.
then I'll even lean in because sometimes I feel as if my background gives me a little license, a little, obviously
Yeah.
with
Absolutely. Yeah.
parental guidance and everything. I wouldn't say anything to a child in my office or in my building that I wouldn't say to my own 2 daughters when I have to light them up because they're not doing what I want them to do at home. So I'm like,
Right.
hey, put the phone down, go to your room, you don't speak, blah, 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 right? So I have the same conversation. My default setting as a admin, as a principal, is as a parent. What would I
Mm-hmm.
want from my own daughters? And
Yep.
every once in a while, my daughters need a little stern lecture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes they need a little consequences and everything like that.
Yeah.
But I share with my kids at school, nothing that you have encountered in life. And some of my
Mm.
kids have encountered really heartbreaking stuff, Derek,
Yeah,
right?
man.
Things that will test your mettle, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes you have a kid in your office and they're talking to you about their experience and some of the things they've gone to, and it takes everything for you. Oh, is someone cutting up onions in here? Like it tears it tears you apart,
Absolutely, man.
because you have 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids who are making their way through a big, loud, raucous world that sometimes can be unkind. And
Absolutely.
sometimes it can be unkind to women, to young
Mm.
girls. It
Hmm.
can be unkind to immigrants.
Yeah. It
It
can be
can be
brutal.
unkind to minorities. And
Yeah,
they're
it's
trying to
brutal.
navigate that,
Absolutely.
right? And so, but in having those conversations, you always want to get to that other side of the conversation, like, I can do it. I
Hmm.
dodged not being whatever, but I dodged certain things in New York City because I had that tough mom who wouldn't let me make
Yeah.
an excuse, wouldn't let
Hmm.
me, relent for one day.
Yeah.
There was no
Yeah.
give with that lady,
Yeah.
right? So one of the things, and back to where you started this conversation, talking about the world that we inhabit now versus the one our kids are going to inherit. One of the things we did recently at my school is we had a career exploration fair, and we brought in, and I say we because it was a whole school, my admin team. I had a couple of my APs who just jumped in and they called everyone in their Rolodex. I have one of
Hmm.
my AP who is, her husband is a lawyer. I think his entire firm was
Hmm.
contacted. Can you guys come? One of my other APs, she's a religious woman, go to church, and she made sure her church was involved. What can we
Hmm.
get?
Hmm.
Another one of my APs, I have three APs. He works a lot with our business partner. He was just and deans and everyone, because we're going to do
Yeah.
this. We're going to do it right. We're going to make this.
Absolutely.
And so what we did, we brought in over 40 different businesses
Mm.
and created sessions for every student in our
Hmm.
building
Yeah.
based on their interest. We gave them an interest sheet. Hey, we're going to have
Yeah.
some folks who are law enforcement officers. We're going to have folks from the military. We're going to have some tech folks. We're going to have some
Hmm.
medical folks, some legal
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah.
What's your interest?
Yeah.
And once our students, pick two or three or five interests, we created a schedule for each child.
Yeah.
So session one, Derek is going to be in the main gym,
Hmm.
listening to these
Yeah.
folks do a 20
Yeah.
minute presentation.
Right.
Because Derek, we don't know which day, which hour, which minute, which second a
Mm.
child, something is going to spark in him and her or her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things, as I greeted the business leaders, it's not me, as we greeted the business leaders, one of the things that I said to them is that each of you in this room today, we were meeting in the library as a welcome. And I said, each of you in this room today, you will say something in your presentation
Hmm.
that's going to lead directly to a child's success,
Yeah.
right? You and I spoke in one of our previous conversation. You shared with me that, a young girl that you knew of who was incredibly bright, but wanted to be a plumber,
Hmm.
right? Wanted to be a plumber. I can tell
And
you right now, 25 years in in education as an admin now, I can rub two pennies together.
hmm.
I have a little
Yeah.
shilling and pence in my pocket
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
everything like that. My plumber makes more than I do. My mechanic
Absolutely.
makes more than I do. I take my
Hmm.
car. You and I know
Hmm.
my mechanic. He's a friend of
Yeah.
yours as well. I
Hmm.
drop my car off, and an hour later, I owe him $500. I don't make $500 an hour.
Yeah.
So, but we wanted to make sure our kids know that their future is bright, and
Hmm.
it's varied,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be one thing.
Yeah.
We have to do a better job as Loudon and as educators of presenting our kids a true buffet of
Yeah.
options for their
Yeah.
future,
Yeah.
because there are kids who feel as if I don't go to Virginia Tech,
Hmm.
if I don't go to UVA, if I don't go to VMI, I
Hmm.
have somehow failed.
Yeah.
When I was at the high school, you would have kids like, there was a year, brother, that the valedictorian was like 4.78, something ridiculous. Because when you're
Hmm.
taking AP classes,
Absolutely. Yeah.
PE classes, and you get some of those bumps, like
Yeah.
4.78.
Mm-hmm.
The next in line, the salutatorian or whatever, was like
Yeah.
4.73.
Yeah.
Like I remember my counseling director had to go to like
Yeah.
decimal points to decide
Yeah.
who's gonna right. And you have kids who are leaving high school in Loudoun County with 4.5, 4.4, who are not getting into UVA,
Mm-hmm.
who are not getting into tech, are they
Mm-hmm.
on the wait list?
Yeah.
And for some of those kids, it's crushing
Yeah.
because we have sometimes presented education as very myopic.
Mm-hmm.
You go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, you
Yeah.
have a good life.
Yeah.
So that's not true for everyone.
Absolutely. No, I think this is and I'm gonna bring you back. We're gonna not just bring you back. You're gonna be a regular on here because there's a lot that we have to unpack. So what I'm hoping that when people watch this episode, if they have questions, just post the questions in the comments and we'll review them and we will answer those questions because I think you're unpacking a lot of things that need time to really digest, right? And what I mean by having you back is that you're a huge resource, right? So I'm going to give you your flowers first of all, because what I appreciate is when there are people in positions of leadership who have had the experience, who've had the understanding, um, and who have the humility to kind of give back and pour back into others, and especially if into others who may or may not look like them, who may or may not have the same background as them, right? But you can also just reflect not too far back and remember that other people poured into you, right? Who didn't really have to go above and beyond, but they poured into you because they saw something in you. And part of what they saw in you was a reflection of the love that you had from home. So what made it interesting when you were talking about the teacher your English teacher who was telling you that you have to indent and you have to capitalize English is that what made it easy for her to reach out to you is because you kind of came to school, and you were for the most part well behaved. You were tardy a couple times to first block, but I think you were well behaved, right? So it made it easy for her to kind of push you, and you didn't really give her any pushback, right? So then when you accepted her feedback, then she gave you more feedback. You didn't balk at her. You didn't say, "Hey, get away from me." You took it and then you improved upon your work and then you saw that really this lady really believes in me and she's supporting me. And I feel like you're doing the same thing with your kids. You've done the same thing, right? And I know your story is it's a vast story, man. You've had experience teaching and being in different school districts all across the country, not just in Virginia, not just in New York. And when you just this conversation, the last thing you said about the valedictorians and the folks who are graduating with high GPAs and not getting into the schools that they want to get into, like that's a whole episode by itself, right? So that's an episode around like overachievers and really making sure that they're aligned with different options, right? And different options in terms of the schools that they apply to, but also different options in terms of the strategies that they employ to get into the schools that they want to, right? I think that's the other thing. There's one thing to get a high GPA and a high SAT score and then just apply to like a very selective school, but everyone who's applying to this very selective school has a high GPA and a high SAT score. So what else are you doing to differentiate yourself, right? And because that could be a crushing blow because it's like everybody told me to do well in school and do well on this test and the world will be my oyster. And I did well in school, I did well on the test, and I still didn't get into where I wanted to go. And that's the myopia that you're speaking of, right? If you just feel like, but there's more than one way to do certain things. So I'm saying all this to say that we have to have you back to um to unpack a lot of this stuff, right? Because it's a lot. It's a lot that you're throwing at folks. And this conversation that you and I are having, I came here in 85, you came in 87, right? So we've been in this
89,
country,
89.
89, 89. We've been in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
system for 30 something plus years, right? I've been in America for 40 years. I'm 50, right? I'm born in 74 just like you, right? So I've been here for 4 decades, right? So I've seen a lot. So this conversation that you and I are having is still on a certain level for like a recent immigrant who just gets here is like, what? GPA, what? Honors, AP? Like, we're having this conversation for folks who kind of know everything, but there are other people who we have to really, take our time and present the information for. So I'm requesting to have you back to
Anytime.
do more stuff. But before we go,
Anytime, brother.
this is how I want us to close out, right? What
Yes,
I
sir.
want you to what I want you to tell me as a principal, right? What are some things that you would share with parents? What are some tips that you could share with parents on how best to prepare their kids to come to school so that it makes for a more cohesive partnership between the parent, the school, and its overall ideal for the child? Like, what are some tips that you would love to pass on to parents and say, hey, if you guys would do a little bit more of this, this would be helpful. If you would avoid these things, this would be helpful. So, just from your principal hat, what are some top tips you could just throw out for us?
Absolutely. And I think, and I want to be very cautious here because I don't want it to seem as if I would ever bash parents because my parents are, when
Yeah.
I meet them, I'm so appreciative and humbled by them because you have
Hmm.
parents who are getting up at like 3, 4, 5 in the mornings, right? And they're
Absolutely.
not getting
Absolutely.
home till 10. I mean, I sit in a, well, comfort office. I mean, I don't sit in my office
Yeah.
all day, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like a
Hmm.
well conditioned and heated if it's in the winter and everything. And I have parents who are construction workers who are out there in like, to me, sub-degree temperature,
Absolutely.
busting butt just to,
Yeah. 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 To
so
provide.
I would never want it to seem. But I think sometime, especially in Northern Virginia, it's becoming Loudoun is very becoming a very expensive place to live and
Hmm.
and navigate and all that good stuff and everything like that. Well, the one nugget I would say to parents is not all, not most, but some parents, the education of your child is your most important job.
Mm.
And I think sometimes as parents, and I do this
Hmm.
too, we talk about
Yeah.
work-life balance, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if my boss calls me and say, "Hey, Frew, I need XYZ from you and this, that, and the other," or "Hey, I need you here, I need you there," you know, that you have to do what's asked, but sometimes you have to ask yourself, is there anything I'm leaving behind? And I'm not saying
Hmm.
in my case, but as a parent, is there anything I'm leaving behind? And
Hmm.
so sometimes it's important for a parent to say, you ask what are some things parents can do. I think you have to come up with very clear ways in your house as how things do. You may
Hmm.
not be there, but just like my mom, boy, the minute you get into this house, you're gonna have a snack. And from 4:30 to 5:30, you're not moving your butt and you're gonna go through Schoology. You're gonna go through every one of your class and you're gonna complete every assignment,
Hmm.
right? And if you have nothing to do, if you're saying you have no homework, nothing, no assignment that's outstanding, you're gonna sit there and you're gonna read for half an hour.
Hmm.
Or you're going to do this program. One of the great things that Loudon does is we provide additional resources for parents. Reading programs, Lexia is one that we use.
Hmm.
Math programs where kids can go and they can just work independently, free
Hmm.
of cost, free of charge, and everything like that. So as parents, utilize the resources that you have.
Hmm.
Loudon is getting close to 100,000 students. I think we're at 90 something thousand. Every one of those students, they're grinding.
Hmm.
And so what you don't want is your child to be left
Hmm.
behind.
Hmm.
Because to me, if your child gets left behind because they're not doing what he or she's supposed to do, eventually they're going to get
Mm.
left out of the best opportunities, left out of
Hmm.
the best schools, best
Yeah.
left out of, so that's the one thing, if there's anything I'll say to parents, just make sure you're hyper focused on that. It's
Hmm.
easy in the hustle and bustle of what we do as parents, as adults, as
Yeah.
taxpayers, as bill payers, as this, that, and the other. That, hey, did I check in with my child today? Did I see how they're doing? Did I check their grades? Did I sit with them? Did I see them do homework tonight? Did I see them read a book today?
Hmm.
So those are things that we have to make sure that's utmost. That's number
Yeah.
one of our list. When people say we have 1,000 things we have to do,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always one. That should
I,
always be one.
and I think that's perfect, right? And so we're gonna put a bow in it here, and this is why I think it's perfect. So I've worked as a middle school counselor and a high school counselor, and I worked as a career counselor post-secondary, right? And what I appreciate about what you've done, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, what I appreciate about what you did with the Career Expo is that you're exposing kids to career options early. And I think that's a great idea that you've done. And it's even something that you can build in maybe quarterly, maybe like you do it like every 90 days, right? So you may not be able to get all 40 employees to come, but if it's something that's built in and the kids know that, quarterly, like we're having our career expo day, I think that helps because career exploration is really what's going to enhance the motivation for the child. If the child finds something that they're interested in, then you can use that interest as motivation to get them to apply it towards the academic piece, right? Because now they have an idea of where they're going. So now the navigation is set. It's like, okay, this is what I want, and this is what I need to do to get there. And I think what kids struggle with, because there are tons of resources. You just named off all these resources that are available. But it's going to be very hard for kids to use those resources if they're not really motivated, if they're not sure what they want to do or why this is relevant. So it's as the adults in the building, what you've done is you've kind of reversed engineer things in a sense by having that career fair, especially for the sixth graders, the seventh graders, the eighth graders, right? To get exposed that early. So imagine one of those kids is, taps in and sees, hey, this is what I want. Like the young lady who I told you, she's a master plumber. And she knew the school that she went to, the principal did exactly what you did when she was in the sixth grade. And one of her classmates' father came into the school and he was a plumber. He came in, he brought his pipes and all his tools. And as a 12-year-old sitting there, she was like, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. All right. So from 12, she knew what she wanted to do, right? And I say this all the time. It happens in sports and it happens in the arts, like music, painting, performance. Like, kids, you can see early because they get a lot of feedback early, right? Like a really good soccer player at 12 knows that he's really good. If you're 12 years old and you're playing against 16, 17, 18, 20-year-olds, then okay, you have a chance to be really good. But if you're 12 years old and you have all A's in every class, we're not really sure how that's going to translate, right? So what you're doing is exposing them to these different career options. And now, if they're like, okay, this is what I want to do, now you can reverse engineer and see, okay, these are the steps I need to take to get there. And then you use that as the fuel and the motivation to help them stay on track academically because now they feel like I found my purpose. I have something, steering me in the right direction. Versus the average 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, if you ask them, hey, what do you want to do? They really don't know. And it's not their fault, even though they have all this technology available. They have technology in their watches, their phones, their laptops, their tablets. They can Google anything. And they'll still look at you blankly and say, I don't know. Because no one took the time to really explore any of these careers with them. So that's why kudos to you. I got to give you your flowers to you and your team for putting this in place that early in middle school because I think that's where it needs to start. Because again, we started this conversation by saying you're at that crucial point, right? They're coming out of elementary school, they're coming into middle school, they come into adolescence, and you're kind of preparing them for the world ahead. And I think what you're doing is fantastic because you're giving them a great boost. So I want to thank you again, Principal Fitzroy Frew. We're going to have you back. Thank you all for joining us on another episode of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Derek. Have a great one, sir.
Thank you for being here.